In 1943, the idea came up to put a 17-pounder into an infantry tank. It's not a particularly unreasonable idea, so they approached Vauxhall to make one under the department number of A43. The problem was going to be the size of the turret ring of the tank to carry the 17-pounder. The gun was already an extremely tight fit in Sherman and its 69-inch turret ring, and the standard infantry tank at the time, the Churchill, had a turret ring of only 54¼ inches. So very obviously you could not simply take a 17-pounder and shove it into a Churchill. A new tank design was necessary. Vauxhall, being rather proud of their Churchill designs, reasonably enough simply took the extant Churchill concepts and put it into a bigger vehicle. As a result, the vehicle was now wider and longer, and heavier. It's now approaching 50 tons. The first of the 6 prototypes, the tank became known as Black Prince, showed up in January of 1945. Of these 6, only one remains, number 4. And that tank is here behind me at the Tank Museum in Bovington. So starting the tour of the vehicle, I'm going to be a little bit different this time. I'm going to go anti-clockwise. You start off with part of the track tensioning system. You see it on the outside as well, and it looks like it hasn't really changed since World War I. You just kind of have this little screw here, idler goes backwards and forwards. The front slope, well, I say slope, I guess technically 0 degrees would be a slope. In the front hull, you will find a vertical plate of 6 inches of armor. This is no better than that of the Churchill. You'll see the driver's direct vision port, and to his left, the Besa machine gun. Now, the director of tank design opined that he had to have the vertical front slope because it was impossible to design a mount for the machine gun in a sloped armor front. Now, very quickly, you look at a Sherman and a T-34 and you wonder where this was coming from. Although, in fairness, it did take the Germans a little while to figure out how to do it on Panther. You had the early vehicles didn't have a ball mount, they just had a slit. A little bit lower on the actual slope, which is 2¼ inches, sloped at 70 degrees, you would have the 2 headlights. Beneath that, this little plate at 5½ inches is sloped at 20 degrees, and you see a toe mounted to the front. The mantlet is basically very similar to that of the Comet tank, derived from it, and similar enough to that which would eventually be found on Centurion as well. On the front slope you'd find storage for 2 sledgehammers, and on the inside of the left track guard, 2 shovels. As you come around to the side of the very Churchill-like fenders, you will see that the idler has been lowered a little bit. It provides a bit of an angle to the fender, and it gives the driver a better view of the outside world. You can also see the track return, which is a very simple skid, again a bit like Churchill, and no fancy return rollers here. Come down to the rolling gear and you will see the Churchill-derived suspension, although you will also note that they've added heavy-duty brackets to mount the wheels in pairs. The metal wheels, 14 inches, are running on metal track. Combine that with the track skid return, and this is not a tank for sneaking up on people with. The coils, well, there's actually 3 of them, all concentric. An outer coil, an inner coil, and then a central core coil. And depending on the level of deflection, the different coils will likely take different levels of the weight. The tracks are 73 links per side, 8.3 inch in pitch and 24 inches wide. Again, bigger than that of Churchill. You will note that they've gone from the Churchill-like flange on the outside of the road wheel to a center guide within the track link. The links are held together by single pin systems. The pins are held in place by a little tab. It's identical on each side, so you have to hammer the tab in or out if you have to break track. As you can see, they've retained the Churchill-type side doors. The whole sides are 3 3/4 inches thick, granted only 2 at the very bottom, but this means that this is a thick and heavy door, and you wouldn't want to be trying to get it open if you're on a bit of a side slope. I guess you have to get out the other side. The shape is round to protect against deformity should it be struck, and it's also sort of chamfered inwards to create a plug effect. As you go further back, you are going to see mounting points for spare track links on the side. Now the track links are mounted on the side where the ear end ticks used to be on Churchill. Now they're up top. Now at least this gives the advantage of perhaps not dragging dirt in from low down as it's being thrown up by the tracks. But they were mounted, or demountable I should say, on Churchill so that you could get the vehicle small enough to fit on the railway loading gauge. Well, this is now a bigger vehicle. Railway loading gauge doesn't really enter into it in the first place. Which brings us to the problem of tank transport. The standard transporter was the Diamond T, which had a 40-ton trailer. Well, unfortunately, this is a 50-ton tank, so while they were waiting for something bigger to come along, they simply signed a waiver, put this on the back of the 40-ton anyway, and for the duration of the testing process, it doesn't seem to have caused a problem. Finally, as you come to the very rear, you will see a very large scraper from mud to stop it getting dragged into the enclosed track return. At the back of the tank, you're going to find a box for an infantry telephone and a first aid kit. Next to it are 2 smoke dischargers. And then, of course, we have the usual array of lifting eyes, towing clevises, whatever. The towing pintle, I note, seems to be a little bit high, but maybe that's just me used to American vehicles. On the left-hand side rear fender is a stowage point for an oil can. On the right-hand fender was supposed to be a water can. So welcome to the back deck, which looks quite sleepable actually. It's generally flat, although there are a number of protrusions to watch out for. I'm sitting on the gun crutch, and more or less beneath me is the Vauxhall gearbox. Now Vauxhall were very pleased to report in initial testing that for the first 60 miles, the clutch only needed adjusting 3 times, which does not strike me as being very reassuring. Underneath the engine deck, which I'm afraid I can't open due to asbestos concerns, and health and safety get very angry about that sort of thing, you would find the Pt.1. It is a horizontally opposed 12-cylinder water-cooled engine that put out about 350 horsepower at 2200 RPM. Now this is basically the same engine as was mounted in Churchill, and that was no speed demon to begin with. So it was for Black Prince, with a maximum listed speed of 10.6 miles an hour. Now there was some consideration being put forward to putting a Meteor into this, possibly the entire pack system out of Comet. And it was estimated that this would get to about 22 miles an hour, but nothing for whatever reason ever came of this. Under the open hatch here you can see part of the final drive steering and braking system. It had the excellent Merritt Brown steering system, which was capable of neutral steer. Everybody loved it. Very large brakes, and then to the front of it you're going to see one of the filler ports for the fuel system. There's a similar filler port on the right hand side as well. 156 gallons of fuel were carried. This was estimated to get the tank about 100 miles on the road or 60 miles cross country. That brings us to an end of the exterior tour and part 1. We'll be back in part 2 to go over the interior positions. I'll see you then.